March 1520, Patagonia. The cold grew stronger with each passing day. Magellan made a decision to spend the winter here. He founded a settlement in San Julian Bay, 5 months at the edge of the world. On March 31st, the crews began building a coastal settlement. They chopped down trees, hammered together planks, and stretched canvas. Magellan kept an eye on everyone. Work gave people purpose. Without purpose, winter meant death. Magellan ordered rations reduced. The winter would be long. There wouldn't be enough provisions for everyone. The sailors grumbled around the fire. The Spanish officers said out loud what others kept silent. The Portuguese commander had led them into a trap. One day, Patagonians arrived at the camp, enormous men in guanaco skins. Magellan went out to meet them. Gifts were exchanged. Peace was established. But that evening, the Spanish officers gathered again in the hold of the San Antonio. Cartagena, Quesada, and Mendoza. 3 Spanish captains against 1 Portuguese. They gathered at night. They spoke quietly. Their words? Magellan is leading us to our death. It's time to take command. It's time to act.
That night, the conspirators signed an agreement. 3 captains, several officers. Quesada took command of the San Antonio by force. Mendoza took command of the Victoria. Cartagena captured Concepcion. Magellan's Trinidad was surrounded. Quesada boarded the San Antonio at night with 30 armed men. The legitimate captain, the Mesquita, was captured. He was shackled. The ship fell to the rebels in a matter of minutes without a single shot. Mendoza took control of the Victoria that same night, silently, without a cry. The sailors loyal to Magellan were locked in the hold under guard. By morning, 3 of the 5 ships were in the hands of the rebels. Magellan's Trinidad was alone. That morning, the mutineers sent Magellan a letter. Demands: change course, return to Spain, hand over command. They controlled 3 of the 5 ships. From a military standpoint, the advantage was on their side. Magellan read. Magellan didn't respond to the ultimatum. Instead, he quietly issued orders. An envoy was dispatched to Victoria with an official document. Loyal sailors were armed. Magellan began his countermove, coolly.
Magellan sent an envoy to Victoria with official orders. Mendoza received it with derision. But 5 armed men came aboard with the envoy. Mendoza realized this too late. While Mendoza was reading the order, one of Magellan's men stabbed him in the throat with a dagger. Death was instantaneous. The ship was in Magellan's hands before the mutineers on the other ships even realized what had happened. Victoria fell under Magellan's control immediately. His men raised anchor and faced the rebel fleet. 3 rebel ships, 2 loyal to Magellan. That night, a standoff in the bay began. That night, Magellan blocked the exit from the bay with Trinidad and Victoria. The rebel ships were unable to sail. Quesada on San Antonio tried to break through. A brief skirmish ensued. Grappling hooks, blows, shouts. Quesada was captured on the deck of the San Antonio. His men surrendered without a fight. Dawn broke. Cartagena on Concepcion realized it was over. He too surrendered. 3 hours, and the mutiny of 3 captains was suppressed by 1 man.
Magellan looked at the captured captains. Quesada was shackled. Cartagena was under guard. He wasn't triumphant. He was thinking. 3 men wanted him dead. The fleet must see the consequences. Otherwise, it would happen again. Quesada testified. He named names. Several sailors, 2 officers. Magellan listened without interrupting. He took notes. Then he closed the logbook and gave the first order, a court-martial, tomorrow morning. 40 men had participated in the mutiny. Magellan condemned them all, and then pardoned the majority. He needed every sailor. Dead oars don't pull. This wasn't weakness. It was the captain's cold calculation. Quesada was sentenced to death. The court-martial deliberated for 2 days. The sentence was read at dawn. Quesada listened standing, without a word. Only the muscles in his jaw tightened. He knew he had signed the sentence himself. The night before the execution, Quesada kept her in chains on the shore.
One of the sailors brought him water. Another brought him a blanket. Magellan allowed it. He wasn't cruel, but he was implacable. There was a difference. A big difference.
Quesada was executed on the shore. Magellan ordered his body impaled, in full view of the entire fleet. It was cruel, but Magellan knew one more mutiny and the expedition would perish. The fleet should fear only one man. Mendoza was executed posthumously. By law, his body was subjected to the rite of execution after he was killed during the capture of Victoria. It was a legal act, harsh, formal. The law of the expedition must work. The entire fleet lined up on the shore, more than 200 men. Magellan walked slowly through the line, looking each one in the eye. The silence was absolute. No one would forget this lesson. Not in the Pacific, not for the rest of the expedition. Pigafetta wrote everything down. Every word Magellan said at the trial. The names of the condemned, the testimony, the verdict. These pages became the only complete evidence of the mutiny. A boy with a notebook saved history. After the execution, silence fell over the fleet. But this was a different silence. Not of fear, but of order. Magellan was once again the sole commander, without doubt, without rivals. 5 months of winter still lay ahead.
Cartagena was spared death, but not exile. Magellan decided he would not execute a man personally appointed by the king. That would be politically dangerous. Instead, the worst. Stay here forever. They were given a small supply of provisions: biscuits, salted beef, a knife, a tinderbox, a few liters of water. It was more than nothing, and less than necessary. Patagonia is unforgiving in winter. Both knew this as well as Magellan. The boat set sail. The two stood on the shore and watched. Cartagena shouted something after him. The words were carried away by the wind. The sailors at the oars did not look back. Thus, Magellan left his last enemies alive in Patagonia. Magellan watched from the deck, without regret, without triumph. He gave them a chance they would not give him. This was not weakness. It was calculation. A dead Cartagena would create political problems in Spain. On August 24th, the fleet weighed anchor. After 5 months in Patagonia, winter was behind us. Ahead lay the continuation of the search for the strait. Magellan stood at the helm. 200 men, 4 ships, 1 course. South.
Magellan sent Santiago on a reconnaissance mission along the coast, a smaller ship captained by the experienced Captain Ceran. The mission? Explore the bays and capes to the south. Return in 3 days. Ceran left, and never returned on time. A sudden storm caught Santiago on the rocky shore. The wind picked up sharply. The anchor wouldn't hold. The waves tossed the ship onto the rocks. Ceran gave the order to abandon ship. There was no chance of survival. Santiago was wrecked. But no one was killed. 32 men reached the shore. Ceran looked around. All around was the empty Patagonian pampa. San Julian was several days' walk away. Winter. No food, no water. Ceran sent 2 of his strongest sailors on foot to San Julian. Several days' journey across the bare pampa. No food. They arrived, frostbitten, half dead. And they reported to Magellan. Santiago was sunk. Serrano was alive. Everyone was alive. Magellan immediately organized a rescue. Ropes were passed from shore to shore across the shallows. All 32 men were pulled out alive. Santiago was lost, but the men were alive. Now the fleet had 4 ships.
On October 21st, 1520, the fleet reached Cape Virgines, 52 degrees south latitude. Ahead lay a discovery that would change the history of navigation, but they didn't know it yet. The pilot cast a sounding lead, 40 fathoms. Then he tasted the water, salty. Magellan closed his eyes for a moment. Salt water? Great depth? This wasn't La Plata. This wasn't a river. This could be a strait. His heart pounded. A passage opened between two rocky capes. The water was blue, salty, deep. The shores were dark basalt and snow-capped peaks in the distance. Magellan looked and said not a word. He had found it. Finally, he had found it. November 1st, All Saints' Day. Magellan named the strait Estreito de Todos los Santos. That day, the fleet began its slow entrance to the passage. 4 ships, 372 kilometers. The route is unknown. According to Pigafetta, Magellan wept. Not from weakness, from relief. 3 years of waiting, a mutiny, a winter in Patagonia. And here it is, the strait. It exists. He has found it. Pigafetta wrote, "The commander wept."
372 kilometers of unfamiliar fairway, a narrow passage, rocky shores, strong currents, sudden squalls. Every few miles, a new danger. Magellan went slowly, very slowly. At night, fires burned on the shores of Tierra del Fuego. The natives watched the ships in the darkness. Magellan named this land Tierra del Fuego, Fireland, because of these lights. Pigafetta wrote everything down. The currents in the strait were unpredictable. Ebb and flow, underwater rocks, sharp squalls from the mountains. One ship was almost lost in shallow water. Magellan did not sleep for 3 days. He personally stood at the helm. In one place, the Trinidad's bottom struck a rock. Impact. Everyone froze. Then, silence. The hull was intact. We passed. Magellan exhaled. The carpenters went down into the hold to check. No leaks. Lucky. Once. Just once. Snow-capped peaks rose on both banks. Ice-covered mountains reflected in the black water. None of the crew had ever seen anything like it. Pigafetta wrote, "It was both majestic and terrifying."
Magellan sent San Antonio and Concepcion ahead to scout. The objective? To go as far as possible, find a way out to the open ocean, and return with a report. Gomez led San Antonio. This was his last chance. At night, the ships communicated with signal lights. The signals were 1 light, all is well. 2, alarm. 3, immediate assembly. The nights were long. The lights burned until dawn, and everyone was counting them. Concepcion returned with a report. Open sea ahead. A way out had been found. The strait existed. Magellan listened to Captain Serran standing. Then he ordered, "Raise the flags on all ships. Fire the cannons. Celebrate." Concepcion returned. San Antonio? No. They waited 2 days, then 3 more. Silence. Magellan sent out a search party. No trace. San Antonio had disappeared. No one yet knew why. Gomez's betrayal would be revealed later. Magellan sent Victoria to search for San Antonio. They spent several days combing the strait. Nothing. Only rocks, cold water, and silence. Magellan accepted what he didn't want to accept. San Antonio was gone. Deserted.
Esteban Gomez seized command of the San Antonio. The rightful captain, Mesquita, was shackled again. Gomez turned the ship back, south, around America. Course, Spain. The betrayal was carefully planned. Gomez steered the San Antonio out of the strait, turned east, into the Atlantic. Course, Spain. He was carrying home a report. The strait had been found, but further passage was impossible. The deception had been prepared in advance, carefully and skillfully. When it became clear that the San Antonio had deserted, Magellan remained silent for a long time, a very long time. His provisions had gone with the deserters. The San Antonio carried 1/3 of the fleet's supplies. Ahead lay the Pacific Ocean, and 1/3 of the supplies, less. Now Magellan had 3 ships, the Trinidad, the Victoria, and the Concepcion. 2 of the 5 had deserted or perished. 1/3 of the supplies were gone. Ahead lay an unknown ocean. Many asked to return. Magellan refused. Magellan gathered the captains of the 3 ships. He asked one question. Should they continue or turn back? Opinions were divided. Magellan listened to them all.
Then he said one word, continue, and closed the meeting. That's all.
On November 28th, 1520, 3 ships emerged from the strait into the open ocean. 3 ships out of 5. 98 men out of 270. They accomplished what no one had ever done before. The Pacific Ocean turned out to be larger than they thought. Much larger. The maps had lied. The journey to the Moluccas was not short, but they didn't know that yet. That day, only calm blue sea lay ahead, boundless. The crew was silent. The sailors who had survived the winter, the mutiny, the loss of 2 ships, the death of their comrades, stood by the sides and looked out at the new ocean. No one could utter a word. It was more than words could say. Magellan named this ocean Mar Pacifico, calm sea, for the calm waters in the first days after leaving the strait. The name has survived to this day. The Pacific Ocean, the largest ocean on Earth. Magellan named it. Magellan became the first European to sail from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This is a fact. This is history. This is why he left Portugal, survived the rebellion, the winter in Patagonia, and Gome's betrayal. Here it is. It's happened. Pigafetta wrote in his diary, "When the commander saw the exit from the strait, he wept with joy." This line in the notes of an Italian observer is the only evidence of the great Magellan's human weakness. One moment of weakness. One. Magellan stood at the stern rail, his back to the crew. The wind carried tears down his cheeks. Then he turned, and his face was again the face of a commander. No one spoke of it out loud. 98 men, out of 270 who had set out. 3 ships out of 5. This was the price of opening the strait. Magellan knew arithmetic, but he did not stop. There was still half the journey ahead. Magellan went on deck and told the crew briefly, "We are the first Europeans in these waters. History has already written our names. Now we must reach the Moluccas." The sailors were silent. Then someone shouted. Everyone shouted. Pigafetta sketched the strait from memory. Every turn, every bay, every cape. His map of the Strait of Magellan became the first map of this passage. It was later copied throughout Europe. The boy with the notebook won again. 3 ships, 98 men, heading northwest, towards the Moluccas. No one knew the Pacific Ocean would be much larger than they thought. A new challenge lay ahead. Emptiness. Food supplies were critical after the loss of San Antonio. Magellan cut rations again. Salted beef, crackers, water. Every day he recorded his expenditure. They didn't know how many miles lay until the next land. No one knew. They didn't know that 99 days lay ahead without land, the longest open sea voyage in the history of those years. They thought the Moluccas are close. On the maps, the distance seemed short. The maps lied. The first sunset in the Pacific. The water turned golden, the sky purple. They had never seen anything like it in the Atlantic. Magellan stood at the bow and watched. Pigafetta wrote. The sailors were silent. It was too beautiful. 3 ships sailed northwest. The Moluccas awaited beyond the horizon. But between them and the spices, there was still a whole ocean. Hunger, scurvy, death. And still, they moved. Forward. Only forward. 99 days without land. The Pacific Ocean turned out to be 4 times larger than Magellan thought. Provisions were running low. The sailors ate leather girths soaked in seawater, and rats 1 coin at a time. Scurvy set in. Gums bled, teeth loosened. The men were losing strength. Magellan ordered the sailors to be given the last of their supplies of onions and garlic. Some were no longer able to stand watch. 19 died in the ocean. 19 men died of scurvy and starvation in the Pacific Ocean. Each time, the body was sewn into canvas and lowered overboard. Magellan stood next to the chaplain. They recited a prayer. A splash. And again,
only water. Pigafetta wrote, Magellan gave part of his rations to the sick. He himself ate less than anyone on the ship. When the sailors learned this, the grumbling ceased. One gesture from a commander is worth more than 1,000 orders. On February 13th, 1521, the fleet crossed the equator again, this time from the other side, into the Pacific Ocean. This meant they had gone further than any European before them. It was history.
On March 6th, 1521, the lookout shouted, "Islands!" 99 days of empty ocean, and suddenly greenery, palm trees, a white shore. The men on deck wept with relief. Guam had fresh water, coconuts, fish. The crew rushed ashore. They ate greedily, silently. Magellan looked at the men. There they were, alive, chewing. So death had not won in the ocean. So the plan had worked. The local Chamorros had stolen one of the sloops. Magellan was furious. He gave the order to burn the coastal huts and take the boat back. It had been a mistake, the first of many on the islands, but from now, a small one. On Guam, all supplies were replenished. Water, rice, yams, coconuts, pigs. Magellan personally oversaw the loading. Every barrel, every sack. After the ocean famine, abundance seemed almost unbelievable, almost paradise. Pigafetta described the Chamorro in detail. Tall, dark-skinned, wearing loincloths. Skilled sailors on proas, counterweight sailboats. Their sailboats were faster than European ships. Pigafetta made a special note of this. On March 16th, the fleet reached the island of Gamogon in the Philippine archipelago. By this point, out of 270 men, exactly 100 remained. 100 men against the entire archipelago. Magellan did not retreat. 100 men out of 270. The rest died of scurvy, drowned, deserted, or were killed in battle. These 100 were special people. They passed through the Strait of Magellan and the Pacific Ocean. There are no more such people. On Gamogon, the men were given a week's rest. The sick were carried ashore. Fresh air, fruit, clean water. Magellan forbade anyone to leave the beach so as not to provoke the locals. A week of rest after 2 years of war with the sea. Magellan had a Malay interpreter brought on board off the coast of Asia. His name was Enrique. When the fleet reached the Philippines, Enrique spoke to the locals, and they understood him. This was the beginning of everything, and a sign of fate. When Enrique understood the locals, Magellan understood too. The Moluccas are nearby. This means they've circumnavigated the globe. We can talk about circumnavigating the globe. No one will say that for several months.
Enrique was captured in Sumatra back in 1511. Magellan bought him as a servant. Now Enrique was talking to the Filipinos. He circumnavigated the globe before Magellan himself. History is silent on this. Raja Kolan from Limasawa arrived on his proa. Enrique spoke to him on Magellan's behalf. They agreed on trade and friendship. Magellan treated the Raja to wine and gave him a mirror. An alliance was concluded. The first mass was celebrated on the shore of Limasawa. The locals watched. Magellan erected a cross on the shore. Raja Kolan looked on without fear. He didn't yet know where this was leading. Neither did Magellan. Magellan exchanged mirrors, bells, and red fabrics for rice, fish, and gold. The local leaders were amazed by the European goods. Magellan wrote, "Gold is cheap here. The islands are rich. Spain will be pleased." Pigafetta studied the local language. He wrote down words and their meanings. He compiled the first ever dictionary of the Visayan language, a scholar in the guise of a sailor. This dictionary has survived to this day. It has survived everything.
On April 7th, the fleet reached Cebu, a major trading port. Raja Humanaban ruled here. Wealthy, intelligent, politically flexible. When Magellan announced Spain's strength, Humanaban listened attentively. Very attentively.
Humabon agreed to be baptized, but he set a condition. Magellan must first defeat all of his enemies. Magellan nodded without hesitation. Pigafetta wrote he was too confident in the superiority of arms. A mass baptism began. Humabon took the Christian name Carlos in honor of the King of Spain. His wife's name was Juana. Then all the leaders were baptized. Then the common people. 800 people in a few days. Magellan presented Queen Juana with a statue of the Santo Niño, the Holy Child, a small wooden figure dressed in gold. The Queen received it with reverence. This statue became a sacred relic of Cebu for centuries. Humabon swore allegiance to the King of Spain. Magellan recorded this as a great victory. One of the largest islands in the archipelago now flew the Spanish flag. But the neighboring islands did not, and their rulers viewed this with alarm.
On the island of Mactan, the chieftain Lapulapu ruled. He refused to pay tribute to Spain. He refused to accept baptism, directly and without explanation. It was a challenge. Humabon asked Magellan for help. Magellan agreed. Humabon offered his warriors to storm Mactan. Magellan refused. He wanted to demonstrate the superiority of European weapons. 60 Spanish soldiers against 1,000 Lapulapu warriors. He didn't understand what he was doing. Magellan was sure. Arquebuses and crossbows against spears and shields. This is not a war, but a demonstration. Spanish steel against bamboo shields. 60 men. That's enough. He was wrong in every calculation. Pigafetta wrote he and others asked Magellan not to go himself. Send others. A commander has no business at the front. Magellan replied, I must be there. The warriors must see me. He went. Night before Mactan, Magellan sat alone in the cabin. Whether he wrote anything is unknown. Pigafetta peeked in. The commander was staring into the darkness. Then he said, Go to sleep. You are needed alive. Those were Pigafetta's last words.
At dawn on April 27, the fleet approached Mactan. In the darkness, only shallow water was visible, too shallow for the ships. Magellan boarded a boat. 60 men. Shallow water. Lapulapu waited on the shore. The ships couldn't get close. Too shallow. The cannons were useless. The boats with the men moved toward the shore under cover of darkness. This deprived the Spaniards of their only advantage. Magellan realized this too late. Lapulapu was waiting. 1,500 warriors. Wooden shields, spears, poisoned arrows. They stood on the shore and watched as 60 strangers in metal walked toward them in knee-deep water. Lapulapu was not afraid. Magellan once again offered to negotiate through Enrique. Lapulapu answered, no. Fight. Magellan gave the order to open fire with the arquebuses. 2 volleys, then empty guns. Reloading took time. Lapulapu took advantage of this opportunity. Lapulapu attacked from the flanks. 1,500 against 60. Poisoned arrows flew from all sides. Reloading the arquebuses in the water was almost impossible. Magellan shouted to his men, "Hold your formation!" The line broke apart.
The first poisoned arrow struck Magellan in the right leg. He staggered. He continued to command. Then, the second blow, a spear to the face. He pushed back his helmet. His face was bloody. He was still holding on. He was still giving orders. Magellan ordered a retreat. His men, to the boats. He himself covered the retreat. He stood facing the enemy until the last soldier reached the water. This was the same man who covered the retreat at Malacca, always the last. Magellan's sword was broken by a blow to the blade. He drew his dagger. More and more warriors gathered around him. Several spears struck simultaneously. He fell to one knee. He rose again. His strength was a reserve that was running out. According to Pigafetta, several warriors attacked Magellan simultaneously. A spear to the leg, another to the face. He fell. He tried to get up. He couldn't. Warriors fell on top of him. Pigafetta watched from the ship and wept. Pigafetta witnessed the commander's death from 20 paces away. He wrote, "We could see him clearly.
We could do nothing to help. He died as he had lived, facing the enemy. That was the only thing we could do. Remember.
Magellan died on April 27th, 1521, in the shallows of Mactan Island. He was 41 years old. He knew the danger. He went. It was his choice, his decision, his death. The survivors returned to their ships. Magellan did not return. The news spread through the fleet in silence. The sailors stood and remained silent. Pigafetta wrote, "We have lost our light, our comforter, our faithful helmsman." Humabon asked Lapulapu to return Magellan's body. He refused. The body of the first man to circumnavigate the globe remains on Mactan. It does not lie in any church in Europe. His grave is the waters of the Philippines. Pigafetta wrote about Magellan in his diary. Several pages. He listed his virtues: wisdom, courage, patience. He said, among his virtues, one shone brightly. He never retreated. Never. The sun was setting over Mactan. For the first time in 2 years, the expedition was without a leader. The fleet lay at anchor. No one knew what to do. The ships creaked in the wind. On the horizon, the Moluccas. So close.
Humabon invited the Spanish officers to a gala feast, a cordial invitation. After Magellan's death, the new commanders were at a loss. Humabon sensed weakness, and he exploited it, coolly and skillfully. Enrique sensed danger. He warned the new commanders, "Don't go to the feast." They ignored him. Enrique himself was freed, according to Magellan's will after his death. The Spaniards no longer had reason to listen to him. 27 Spaniards went to the feast, the expedition's best officers, unarmed, as was customary, in honor of friendship, in fine clothes. Humabon greeted them with a smile, a laid table, palm wine, silence. Then, a blow. When the Spaniards sat at the table and relaxed, Humabon gave the signal. The warriors, hidden behind the mats, emerged. The doors closed from the outside. The massacre began. 27 men were killed in a few minutes, unarmed, without a chance. Almost all 27 died. Captain Serrano was captured. They brought him ashore and shouted at the ships, ransom or death. The ships didn't respond. Serrano was killed. The fleet lost another 28 men.
The ships were leaving. Serrano screamed from the shore. They heard him. He was not saved. The new commander, Barbosa, made the decision. He feared an ambush. He didn't know what to do. He simply sailed away. Serrano remained. Forever. The fleet was left with 3 ships and about 60 men. Out of 270, 210 were lost, died, deserted, murdered. Now there weren't enough men to man 3 ships at once. A tough decision was made. Concepcion was burned. There weren't enough men to man 3 ships. The ship, which had survived the mutiny in Patagonia, rounded the Strait of Magellan, became a bonfire in the Philippine Sea. It was necessary. It was a farewell. After Magellan, 3 commanders came and went in a matter of weeks. Barbosa was killed at a feast. Then Serrano. Then Espinosa took command. Without charisma, without authority, without a plan. The fleet wandered. For months. Pigafetta continued to keep a diary. Every day. The death of his commander, the fire at Concepcion, the death of Serrano, the change of commanders. He wrote everything down. It was his duty to Magellan, to preserve his memory. As long as he could write. 2 ships wandered the Philippine archipelago for months. The Maluku Islands were close by, but without Magellan, no one knew their exact course. They sailed from island to island, losing time, losing men. Barbosa and several other commanders died at Humabon's feast. Then Serrano was killed. Then Mesquita was again in custody. each new commander lost men. The expedition was melting away. The Maluku Islands were close by. Without Magellan and Falero, navigation became a guess. The pilots remembered the Maluku Islands from stories, from the stars, from the scent of spices that was supposed to appear. They sailed by the scent. Literally, by the scent. One morning, a scent appeared in the air. Pungent, sweet, unfamiliar, and at the same time recognizable from descriptions. Cloves, nutmeg. The sailors sniffed the air like dogs. Pigafetta wrote, the smell was the sweetest in the world. In November 1521, almost 6 months after Magellan's death, 2 ships sighted the Moluccas. Magellan died a few weeks' voyage from here. He almost made it. Almost.
On the island of Tidore, the ruler welcomed the Spaniards warmly. He was the enemy of the neighboring island of Ternate, which was ruled by the Portuguese. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. A trade agreement was concluded immediately. Spices flowed aboard. The holds filled. Cloves, nutmeg, black pepper. In 3 months, they loaded so much that both caravels sat deep in the water. One ship with spices was worth more than the entire expedition cost Spain. Everyone knew it. Trinidad sprang a leak. The cargo was too heavy. The planks were old. They decided to split up. Victoria would leave for Spain immediately. Trinidad would remain for repairs. This separation cost half the crew their freedom and lives. Victoria left the Maluku in December 1521. 47 people, a hold full of spices, heading west, around Africa, to Spain. She was the only ship that would return home. Magellan did not live to see the Maluku. He died a few weeks into the journey. But it was he who discovered the route, found the strait, crossed the Pacific Ocean, proved the Earth is round. His name is on the channel's map. It will live forever. Forever.
Victoria was sailing across the Indian Ocean. One ship, 47 people. The Portuguese controlled all the ports. Stopping was dangerous. They sailed for months without calling at ports, straight ahead, around the Cape of Good Hope. On the return journey, 13 more people died. Scurvy, hunger, exhaustion. Only 18 reached Spain, out of 270 who set out. 18 people. But they circumnavigated the globe, the first in history. On September 6, 1522, Victoria entered the port of Sanlúcar. 18 people, 3 years on the way. The first circumnavigation was complete. They had circumnavigated the globe. No one had done it before. Pigafetta disembarked with 2 things, a notebook and a pen. He preserved them through all the storms, battles, and famine. In the notebook lies the first account of the circumnavigation, a book that all the monarchs of Europe would read. Magellan died at Mactan, but he circled the Earth, through his ships, through his route, through his people. The Earth turned out to be round. He proved it. The first, the only one, forever in human history.
In the Maluku Islands, the holds filled with cloves. Success. But then came the news. The Portuguese king had declared Magellan a traitor. All ships on the expedition were to be seized. Trade was outlawed. The commanders gathered in Trinidad. They discussed the news in hushed tones. 2 ships, just over 30 men. The Portuguese controlled all ports. The route home was closed, if they went straight ahead. A decision was needed. Despite everything, the holds were loaded to the brim. Cloves, nutmeg, pepper. One hold of spices was worth more than the entire expedition. It was the only thing worth continuing for. The cargo had to reach Spain. In the Maluku Islands, several Malay islanders joined the crew, voluntarily. They wanted to see another world. No one told them that most would not return. However, they didn't ask. The decision was made. 2 different routes. Trinidad would go east, to Spanish Panama. Victoria will head west, around Africa, to Spain. No one said out loud that Trinidad's chances were practically zero.
In December 1521, two ships parted ways off the coast of the Maluku Islands, Trinidad to the east, Victoria to the west. It was a silent farewell. Both crews knew they would never see each other again. Juan Sebastian Elcano took command of the Victoria, a Biscayan sailor, a participant in the mutiny in Patagonia, pardoned by Magellan. Now, everything depended on him. 30 men, one ship, one chance. On the Victoria were 38 men, a mix of Spaniards, Portuguese, Italians, Malays. The hold was full of cloves. The ship was deep. The voyage around Africa would take several months. Food might be scarce, but there was no other way. The Malay islanders taken on board were seeing such a ship for the first time. They touched the ropes, sniffed the tar, looked at the sails. One of them sat by the side and gazed for a long time at the receding islands. He would never see them again. Pigafetta sat at his usual post by the side. He opened his last blank notebook. He wrote, "Return to Victoria, December 1521. Elcano, commander. Course west. Spain awaits."
Trinidad headed east, across the Pacific Ocean to Panama. It seemed a reasonable plan, 1,500 kilometers of open ocean. But the winds in the Pacific don't question the plans of Spanish captains. They encountered headwinds. They sailed against the wind for a month, then another month. The Pacific Ocean from the east proved impenetrable. Every mile forward was worth 3 back. Supplies were running low. The men were weakening. It was impossible to maintain course. Diseases broke out on Trinidad. Scurvy, then something akin to dysentery. Several men died. Espinosa realized Panama was unreachable. He made the decision to turn back to the Moluccas, to the Portuguese. Trinidad turned back, west, to the Moluccas. It was an admission of defeat and a death sentence. The Portuguese ships already knew about Trinidad. They were already waiting. Espinosa steered the ship straight into a trap. When Trinidad returned to the Maluku Islands, Portuguese warships were waiting for them. 3 carracks, cannons loaded, the Portuguese flag over the fortress. Espinosa understood everything instantly. There was nowhere to run. There was no point in resisting.
Portuguese soldiers boarded the Trinidad. The Spanish offered no resistance. They were too few and too weak. Commander Espinosa was shackled. The spice cargo was confiscated. The ship became Portuguese trophy. The Portuguese reloaded the spices onto their own ships. Barrels of cloves, sacks of nutmeg. Everything the Trinidad's crew had laboriously loaded in the Maluku Islands. The Spanish watched in silence. All that was left to watch. The Trinidad's crew was scattered among Portuguese prisons in the Maluku Islands. Then they were to be sent to India, to hard labor. Of the 24 men on this crew, only 4 would return home. 4 out of 24. The Portuguese were never able or unwilling to repair the Trinidad. The flagship of Magellan's expedition, the very ship that led the fleet through the strait and into the Pacific Ocean, was abandoned. He rotted off the coast of the Maluku Islands, quietly. Espinosa spent several years in a Portuguese prison. Then he was sent to Goa. Then he was pardoned and returned to Spain. One of the 4. He told us what happened to Trinidad. Without him, we would know nothing.
The survivors from Trinidad were sent to India, in the hold of a Portuguese ship, in shackles. The journey took several months. It was the same route Magellan took in 1505, but in the opposite direction. Captured. In Goa, they were thrown into prison. Work under the tropical sun, meager food, disease. Tropical India is merciless to Europeans without immunity. One by one, those who survived the Strait of Magellan and the Pacific Ocean died. Of the 24 Trinidad crew members, 20 died in captivity, from disease, exhaustion, torture. Their names are not recorded. Their graves are in Indian soil. They circumnavigated the globe
and died nameless. It is unfair. 4 lived to see their release. Among them was Espinosa. Years passed. They were ransomed or pardoned. They returned to Spain one by one, in different years. Everyone carried a story in their heads that no one else alive knew. Espinosa returned to Spain and testified. He told everything: the attempt to sail east, the headwinds, the capture. His words became part of the official history. The dead spoke through him.
Elcano was no hero by nature. He had been involved in the mutiny, pardoned by Magellan. But it was he who brought Victoria home. Discipline, caution, stubbornness. Sometimes history chooses the unexpected. Provisions were running low. The voyage around Africa took longer than expected. Fish were caught overboard. Rainwater was collected in the sails. The Malay Islanders, unaccustomed to the cold of the southern latitudes, weakened faster than anyone else. The Malay Islanders did not survive the southern latitudes. Cold, humidity, unfamiliar food. One by one, they died on the voyage. None of them returned home. Their names were not recorded. Only Pigafetta mentioned them in passing. Some of the crew proposed surrendering to the Portuguese in Mozambique. There were no provisions. People were dying. Spain was months away. The Portuguese would at least give food. Elcano listened and refused. Spain or death. They voted. The majority were with Elcano. Spain at any cost. No one said out loud that they would almost certainly die without food before Spain, but everyone knew it, and they still voted to continue. That's dignity.
The Cape of Good Hope. Sailors called it the Cape of Storms. Ships foundered here. Here 2 oceans met. The Victoria was heading for it with worn sails, rotten rigging, and 30 hungry men on board. During a storm near the Cape of Good Hope, the mainsail snapped. The sailors climbed the mast in a 30-degree gale to repair it. Any awkward step could have thrown a man overboard. 2 fell. 1 was saved. The other was not. Pigafetta wrote, Elcano held the helm for 36 hours straight, without sleep, without food, only cold tea and willpower. It is details like these that make a man more than just a name in a history book. The Victoria rounded the Cape of Good Hope. The storm gradually weakened. The water became warmer. Elcano let go of the helm. He sat down right on the wet deck. He closed his eyes for 30 seconds. Then he stood up. The work continued. After the Cape, they sailed non-stop for 2 months along the African coast, hungry and exhausted. No ports were allowed. The Portuguese controlled everything. They ate fish and drank rainwater. They headed north. The Cape of Good Hope. Sailors called it the Cape of Storms. Ships foundered here. Here 2 oceans met. The Victoria was heading for it with worn sails, rotten rigging, and 30 hungry men on board. During a storm near the Cape of Good Hope, the mainsail snapped. The sailors climbed the mast in a 30-degree gale to repair it. Any awkward step could have thrown a man overboard. 2 fell. 1 was saved. The other was not. Pigafetta wrote, Elcano held the helm for 36 hours straight, without sleep, without food, only cold tea and willpower. It is details like these that make a man more than just a name in a history book. The Victoria rounded the Cape of Good Hope. The storm gradually weakened. The water became warmer. Elcano let go of the helm. He sat down right on the wet deck. He closed his eyes for 30 seconds. Then he stood up. The work continued. After the Cape, they sailed non-stop for 2 months along the African coast, hungry and exhausted. No ports were allowed. The Portuguese controlled everything. They ate fish and drank rainwater. They headed north. 13 men stood on the pier and watched the Victoria depart. They had been captured by Portuguese soldiers. They had survived 3 years of expedition, the Strait of Magellan, the Pacific Ocean,
and were captured a few weeks from Spain. The 13 Spaniards were interrogated in the Portuguese fortress on Santiago. Where were you coming from? Where did you get the spices? What kind of ship was the Victoria? They answered little. The Portuguese already knew enough. The circumnavigation had taken place. That was a fact. The 13 men had spent several months in captivity on the Cape Verde Islands. Then they were transported to Lisbon. There they testified. Then they were released. All 13 had survived captivity. All returned home. In Lisbon, the 13 Spaniards testified to the Portuguese court. They told everything about the strait, about the Pacific Ocean, about Magellan's death. The Portuguese listened attentively. The world would never be the same. They knew it. 13 were released a few months after Victoria's arrival in Spain. They returned home later, and alive. History brought them back. But the first circumnavigation record belonged to 18 on Victoria.
After escaping Cape Verde, there were 18 people left on board, plus a few Malays who were still holding out. Spain was weeks away. Elcano didn't stop. For nothing. For no one. There were almost no provisions. They caught fish daily, small Atlantic fish that you couldn't even call food. Rain was collected from the sails. Pigafetta wrote, "We were so hungry that we ate rat droppings." In early September, the Spanish coast appeared. Faint, barely visible, but it was Spain. The sailors at the sides were crying. Pigafetta wrote, "We sobbed without shame." After 3 years of this, they had the right. Sanlúcar de Barrameda, the very port from which they departed 3 years ago. On 5 ships, now 1 ship, 18 people, a hold of spices, and a story that cannot be told in 2 words. On September 6th, 1522, the Victoria's anchor dropped into the waters of Sanlúcar. 3 years, 1 month, and 17 days later, the first circumnavigation was complete. 18 of the 270 men.
18 men came ashore, barely clothed, hungry, sunburned. The people on the pier froze. Then they started screaming. Someone ran into town for news. The news was incredible. They had circumnavigated the globe. The first thing the sailors did on shore was ask for bread. White Spanish bread. They were brought a whole basket. Pigafetta wrote, "We haven't eaten bread for 3 years. When it was given to us, no one could take a bite right away. Their throats were sore from crying." Elcano was the last to disembark. He stood on the pier and said nothing. Then he knelt and kissed the ground. A sailor returning home. Not a hero, just a man who didn't give up. That's sometimes enough. The news flew to Seville, then to Valladolid, to King Charles. The first circumnavigation was complete. The Earth is round. It's been proven. The western route to the Moluccas exists. Spain is rich. Magellan is dead. That's it. Victoria, the only ship out of 5. 252 people died. 18 returned. 1 ship, 1 hold of spices, and a complete change in humanity's understanding of the size of the world. Forever.
Pigafetta went to Rome, to Pope Adrian VI. In his hands were notebooks with notes from the entire voyage. They had survived. Through storms, riots, famine, captivity, Pigafetta was the keeper of memory. And he succeeded. Pope Adrian received Pigafetta. He listened. He asked about the islands, the natives, Magellan. Pigafetta spoke for an hour. Then he opened the notebook and read a few pages. The Pope said nothing. Then he uttered one word. Impossible. Pigafetta wrote a book. The manuscript was titled Report on the First Voyage Around the World, the first description of how the world is really structured. The book was read by all the monarchs of Europe. It was translated into 8 languages. Without Pigafetta, we would only know the official documents of the expedition. Only he personally recorded smells, conversations, fears, tears. Great events remain great as long as there is someone to write them down honestly. Antonio Pigafetta, 18 years old at the beginning, 23 at the end.
He circumnavigated the globe as an observer, created the first description of the Pacific Ocean, the first Tagalog dictionary, the first map of the Strait of Magellan.
Victoria circumnavigated the Earth. Fact: the Earth is a sphere, proven not by theory, not by mathematics, but by a ship, by 18 survivors, by a hold of carnations. This changed everything Europeans thought about the world they lived in. Victoria's hold with the carnation was sold immediately. The profit covered all the expedition's expenses. Charles I was pleased. Elcano received a coat of arms with the inscription, "The first to circumnavigate me." No one before him had such a thing. Charles I granted Elcano nobility and a coat of arms. On the coat of arms is a globe, and the inscription in Latin, "Primus circumdedisci me," "You were the first to circumnavigate me." Elcano looked at the coat of arms. Then he said, "There were 18 of us." Magellan received nothing posthumously. Officially, he remained a traitor in Portuguese documents. Spain remembered him as its admiral, but they gave Elcano an order. The first to put up the cross? Magellan. Laurels to another. The Strait of Magellan. It's the only thing officially named after him. 372 kilometers of water between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Ships pass through it today, and they call it his name. Forever.
5 ships left in 1519. 1 returned. 18 men out of 270. This is not a failure. It is a price. The price of knowing how the earth works. Someone had to pay it. Beatriz Barbosa, Magellan's wife, died in 1521, even before her husband's death became known. She never learned of his fate. Their son also died in infancy. The price was high. Magellan never returned. His feat was officially recognized, but the glory went to Elcano. History is unfair to those who die halfway. But without Magellan, there would be no strait, no Pacific. There would be nothing. Magellan. The strait bears his name. A crater on the moon bears his name. Galaxies bear his name. When the first space probe was sent beyond the solar system in the 20th century, astronomers remembered Magellan. The Earth turned out to be round. He knew it. He proved it. He died in the shallows of Mactan. But the world was different after him. His name is on the map, as long as there are maps. That is immortality. The only true immortality.
The sale of spices from Victoria's hold covered the entire expedition's expenses and brought in a profit. 4 of the 5 ships were lost. 252 men died. And still, a profit. It was an era without sentimentality. The Spanish treasury counted. 5 ships, wages for 270 sailors, provisions, weapons. It all paid off. 1 hold of cloves outweighed 3 years and 250 deaths in the royal treasurer's register. The Portuguese king didn't dispute the right to the Moluccas. He paid 350,000 gold ducats to Spain for islands that Magellan had proven Spanish. The money was enormous. The story, cynical. Charles I received money, spices, and a historic victory. He thanked Elcano, he threw a feast. He never once mentioned the names of the dead. Monarchs count their profits. The names of the dead are left to historians and widows. There were no widows at the feast in honor of the circumnavigation. There were no mothers of the dead. There were no names. 18 returned. 252 did not. History is always written by those who returned. The rest remained silent. In 1523, an official report of the voyage was published. It was read by the imperial secretary, Maximilian of Transylvania. The document was read at every court in Europe. For the first time, the world learned that circumnavigation was possible.
Maximilian's report was copied and circulated. Rome, Paris, London, Lisbon. Every court wanted to know, what had the Spaniards discovered? What did it mean for trade, for power, for maps, for the entire familiar world order? Then Pigafetta's book was published, an unofficial report, a living diary with smells, conversations, fears. For the first time, the reader could feel what it was like to sail for 3 years. The book was read avidly, everywhere. Pigafetta's book was translated into 8 languages: Italian, Spanish, French, German, English. For the first time in history, a single book described the entire known world, and the world turned out to be larger than all the old maps depicted. Pigafetta outlived everyone who sailed with him. He died around 1528. He wrote 3 copies of the manuscript with his own hands. He gave one to the Queen, one to the Pope, one to himself, as a memento.
Since the time of Pythagoras, people have thought the Earth is a sphere. But thinking and proving are 2 different things. Victoria proved it. 1 ship, 1 voyage, end of debate for thousands of years. The Earth is round. It's no longer a hypothesis. Magellan also proved something else. All the oceans are connected. The Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans are one body of water, one planetary system. The boundaries of the oceans are on maps, not in nature. This changed the entire science of the sea. Ptolemy drew the Earth incorrectly. Ptolemy's atlas was the main book of geography for 1,500 years. After Magellan, it had to be rewritten. The size of the Earth, the distances, the shape of the continents, everything turned out to be wrong. The Pacific Ocean turned out to be 4 times larger than the Atlantic. No one expected this. Maps had to be completely redone. The Earth was far larger than all calculations. This meant there were still hundreds of years of discoveries to be made. After Magellan's expedition, the first globe was created that accurately reflected the shape of the Earth. Mercator and other cartographers relied on the data from the voyage. The world on maps began to resemble the world in reality, for the first time in history.
After Magellan, cartographers all over Europe remade their maps. New distances, new shores, new islands. Each map became more accurate because one ship had sailed where before there had been only white parchment. Guam, the Mariana Islands, the islands of Indonesia, the Moluccas. Magellan put all this on the map of the world. Before him, a blank spot. After him, names, coordinates, trade routes. The world took shape, finally. The Western Spice Route existed. Magellan had found it. Trade no longer depended on Arab middlemen and Portuguese monopolies. The global economy began to change. Slowly, but irreversibly. The Treaty of Tordesillas divided the world into Spanish and Portuguese halves, but Magellan proved the world is not divided by 2 lines. It is round. It is bigger. The treaty had to be revised. A new era of diplomacy had begun. Magellan's expedition became the pinnacle of the Age of Discovery. After it, the world was almost completely mapped. A new era of exploration and colonization had begun. Magellan closed one chapter and opened another. 500 years have passed. The Strait of Magellan is still called the Strait of Magellan. Every ship that passes through it, container ships, yachts, icebreakers, bears his name. A name has outlived all. That is immortality. 2 dwarf galaxies, satellites of the Milky Way, are called the Magellanic Clouds. When astronomers look at them, they pronounce the name of the man who died in the shallows of Mactan. Mactan is a galaxy, disproportionately, and rightly so. In 1989, NASA launched a space probe to Venus. It was named Magellan. The probe compiled a complete map of Venus. The name of the man who mapped Earth was now on the spacecraft. In Brazil, there was a city called Magalhães. In Portugal, there are monuments. In Spain, there are streets. In Chile, there is a national park. In Patagonia, there is a strait. The name of a man who was called a traitor in life became the name of an entire world. Who was Magellan?
a Portuguese who became a Spaniard, lame after Morocco, betrayed by kings, defeated a rebellion, found the strait, died in battle, and circumnavigated the globe through his own people. Forever first. Forever.
A man leaves behind deeds. Magellan left behind the strait. He left behind a route. He left behind proof of the roundness of the earth. He left his name in the sky and on maps. That's more than entire armies and entire nations leave behind. 270 men. 18 returned. The rest died or deserted. Each of those 270 believed, or didn't believe, but they went on, that something more important than their own lives lay ahead. Sometimes that's true. Magellan knew the expedition was dangerous. He knew that not everyone would return. He knew that he personally might not return. And yet he went on anyway. That's the difference between those who change history and those who simply endure it. You know the earth is round. You take it for granted. But someone had to prove it. One man with 5 ships, 300 years ago. His name was Magellan. Now you know him. The Strait of Magellan. 37 years of life, thousands of miles, one plan that had haunted him for 20 years. He passed, he found, he died. And the world became different. Forever. For everyone. Including you. Right now.